Welcome back to Voices of the West, our continuing series of interviews with Western authors today. Today we have the joy of speaking with Bob Madison, also known as author Scott McCrea, who's been
Hello,
writing
Cap.
a large series of the Tom Mix books. Sorry,
I just said hello.
no problem. So let's start off here with a quick question. What Scott McCrea? It's an interesting name. It sounds very similar to things.
Well, the whole point of it is it being similar to things. I always wanted to write westerns ever since I wanted to be a writer. And when I thought of so my name, as you just said, is Bob Madison, and I've written books under my own name. But I sound like an accountant. Bob Madison. It's like building a better bank account with Bob Madison. But you know, Thunder Mountain by Bob Madison doesn't sound quite right. So I wanted to figure out what name would resonate with Western fans. So I actually came up with two of my favorite Western stars, Randolph Scott and Scott McCrea. And in the course of one highball, christened myself Scott McCrea. And that's the name I chose for the Tales of Tom Mix series.
Very good. So, how did you get into writing westerns? You say you've always been involved with. What's your background that got you
here? There's this Portuguese word, saudade, which means nostalgia for things that you didn't personally know. And if there is a single word that's going to be inscribed on my tombstone, which hopefully will be many, many, many years from now, it'll probably be saudade. And that's because I was always enamored with the Old West. It was something I would never know. And it started when my parents took me to a drive-in movie in Pennsylvania. I was a little kid, and they took me to see Five Card Stud with Dean Martin and Robert Mitchum. And of course, the villain was Roddy McDowall. And I just thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they took me afterwards to see movies that I was way, way too young to see, like the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns. And they even took me to the Wild Bunch, if you'd believe that. And I'm like 4 or 5. And I thought it was the greatest thing in the whole world. So I was always nostalgic for a West that I never knew and never could know. But then the other thing is, when I was a kid, the thing I wanted to be, if I couldn't be a cowboy, is I wanted to be a writer. And I figured I could do that more easily than I could be a cowboy. And the type of writer I wanted to be, of course, because it's me, is also somebody or something that is largely erased from history. I wanted to be a pulp writer. I wanted to be those guys who had a series character and a readership who wanted to find out what happened to this person every month. And it just seemed to me that I was able to combine these two passions, to be the type of writer that I always wanted to be, and write the kind of books I always wanted to read, set in a world I always wanted to live in. And that's how I came up with the Tales of Tom Mix.
Very good. You're definitely in the right place. We like our serials that are being put out on a regular basis that people can read and binge through and just keep on going on the same type of character. So perfect fit there. What do you think makes a great Western?
Near the end of his life, they were asking Gary Cooper why he made so many Westerns. And Coop, and I say this like I knew him, Coop sat there and he thought about it for a few minutes, and he said, I like Westerns because they're real. And if you were to ask me what is the quality what makes a great Western, is that they all have some kind of truth that other genre fiction doesn't have. Mysteries are about finding the truth, but they're not about truths. You can say the same thing for thrillers and romances, but Westerns have an elemental power and a sort of elemental connection to the truth. And I think if you're doing them well, you're telling a story and you're also somehow telling the truth. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes a good Western. They're true.
I like it.
Yeah.
How do you feel that Westerns are best promoted, particularly as people often say Westerns is like, oh yeah, well, just old people do those and stuff like that. How do we reach out to new audiences?
So, as we say out West, I think that's horse pucking. I don't think only old people like Westerns. I think all people like Westerns. I think the Western audience is huge. And I think the Western audience is horrendously underserved. I think our cultural gatekeepers don't want us watching Westerns or don't like Westerns. So it's very rare that you will find, one of the big houses pushing Westerns, or if they do push Westerns, they push revisionist Westerns. But there's this whole swath of readers who love Westerns and are sort of left out, I think, by mainstream publishing, by mainstream movie houses. And I think if there are good Westerns, good traditional Westerns out there, people will find them regardless of any age. And I think a great way of reaching out to that young audience is the way we're doing it now. Dusty Saddles is publishing these things as ebooks. My understanding is that there are plans for audiobooks. And we're out there in social media. Dusty Saddles and their books, their Westerns specifically, are out there where the audience is for them. And I think it's an underserved audience, and we're making inroads into finding out how to reach them. But yeah, I think we're already on track for doing that.
Very much so, yes. But in the whole level of the underexposed elements of things, what do you think are some of the more underexposed and underdeveloped parts of the Old West in terms of stories?
Well, so I think believe it or not, I'm kind of tackling that a bit with the Tales of Tom Mix. Everybody seems to think that the Old West is like this 20-year period from the end of the Civil War to the middle or the end of the 1880s. But if you look at pictures of the United States and in the West, you could really argue that the Old West almost lasted until the end of the Great War, or at least the beginning of the Great War. So for me, the Old West is really everything from Daniel Boone, which is the opening of the frontier, until the very birth of what we think of as the modern world. And I think also that's part of the great sense of nostalgia or saudade, is that the Great War birthed the modern world as we know it, and Westerns are everything about the pre-modern world. So, but to get more specific to answer your question, so my Westerns, or most of them, so far, most of the Tom Mix Westerns are set in 1910. So, and a lot of them take place where Tom is Marshall in Dewey, Oklahoma. And Dewey is this place right at the cusp of modernity, but also at the end of the Old West. So most people are still riding horses, and there are horse-drawn carriages, but there are telegraphs and the beginning of automobiles, and there's still some, they're the beginning of some cars there, and they're the beginning of what would even be called the suburbs. And Tom, who went west specifically so he could experience the West, is looking at all of this with a sort of wary eye. He's not quite sure that all of these changes are for the best. Frankly, I sit with Tom on this, but he's not quite sure that all of these changes are for the best. And that's an under explored period of the West, the very end of it. And I'm happy to be doing that now.
Yeah, it's the whole fading of the West that went into things. Yeah. And it's a very interesting time period because you have the traditional, you have the farmers, you got the merchants, you have people who basically fought everything out of nothing to make an existence, and then modernity sliding into it all, and the clash of those two different cultures together, and that makes a very interesting time period.
Yeah.
What kind of Western have you long dreamed of writing? You're working on the Tom Mixes right now, 1910, that kind of a thing. What kind of stories have you always dreamed about trying to write?
Well, so I picked Tom Mix because I always wanted to write, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, I always wanted to write about Buffalo Bill Cody. Mm-hmm. Because Buffalo Bill Cody is for me one of the really fascinating figures of the West, in that he was a real Westerner and a real quote unquote cowboy, but he was also the first multimedia star. And he started doing this early enough where the West was actually still alive and a thing. And he managed to make the West, which was this reality, into the West or the Western, which is this myth that we're still trading on today. and he was a fascinating figure because he managed to have a foot in both worlds. In fact, after Little Bighorn, Buffalo Bill was actually on stage in Rochester, New York, where he got word that Buffalo Bill, that Custer died at Little Bighorn, and in his costume, not his dress clothes, but his stage costume, got on a train and went and then started or restarted his career as an Indian fighter in his costume. So you have this wonderful sort of bifracted reality. It's reality and it's hyper reality, and that's what the West is, and that's all because of Buffalo Bill Cody. And I picked Tom Mix instead of Buffalo Bill Cody because when Tom Mix, who was born in Pennsylvania, oddly enough, not far from where I saw westerns at a drive-in movie, saw Buffalo Bill's Wild West when he was 10 years old. Now he's living in what's essentially suburbia, but he sees Buffalo Bill at his Wild West at 10 years old, goes home, starts making lasso tricks with his mother's clothesline, makes a Wild West suit for himself, and says, someday I'm going to go west and be a cowboy. And it's exactly what he did. And not only did he do that, he also, in following Buffalo Bill's footsteps, became one of the first great multimedia Western stars. Movies, there were books about Tom Mix. He was in comic books, comic strips. There was a radio show about Tom Mix. So, I mean, Tom Mix was just as big as Buffalo Bill Cody and just as much a real Westerner, but he made himself one.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
Yeah.
Both, yeah. Buffalo Bill is a personal favorite of mine as well for that, but I've always found him fascinating and like to bring him into things anytime you can, because he had the modern sense of being a showman, but at the same time he lived everything that got him to that point, and he's just a fascinating character that way. And Tom Mix, rightfully so too. He's brought in everything into the birth of Hollywood and started the whole thing of he was king of the cowboys.
King of the Cowboys, yes. But before that, a cowpuncher, a night marshal, honorary Texas Ranger, part-time Rough Rider with Teddy Roosevelt, possible draft dodger, we don't know, full-time bartender at times. So definitely my kind of guy.
How do you be a draft dodger and a Rough Rider at the same time?
Well, so he actually left. So supposedly he actually left before his military service was up. So not a dodger, but a deserter, I guess.
Yes, makes sense.
But a powerful guy. He unlike Buffalo Bill, he married multiple times. Bill was unhappily married once, and Tom was unhappily married multiple times. So I guess he was more advanced in one way than another. I don't know.
Well, he kept marrying people. Well, a number of people he met on different sets and stuff like that, and he did not have good relationships at all with them.
No.
Yes, interesting things there. How do you feel the Western market is changing? We went through a time period that it was the idealized white hat, black hat, to 1970s where it was all black hat and everything like that going on. And now we've into the post-Tombstone world, birth of Yellowstone, that kind of thing going on here in the large medias of things. What do you think we're at now?
I think we're actually at a place that we haven't been at before, because the Western brand and the Western mood, for want of a better word, is expanding. I mean, even just 30 years ago, during Lonesome Dove and Dances with Wolves, Westerns, whether they were white hat Westerns or what I call the mud and muck Westerns, they were very much of a muchness. They were, what they were. They were set within a specific historical period. You could, if they were revisionist Westerns, you knew everybody was wretched, and if they were, traditional Westerns, you knew everyone was heroic. But I think with the rise of contemporary Westerns, and Western culture, which is becoming more and more attractive, particularly to young people, I think we're going to see an era of more modern Westerns. And modernity is everything from mid 20th century till today. but I'm not surprised that so many popular shows on cable and streaming services are Western based. I think they have an elemental quality that people miss, that you do not get in a superhero movie, or that you don't get in a big budget special effects extravaganza or a science fiction picture. There's an honesty to them. And because the West is so malleable, you could pretty much set them at any time. So that's where I think we are, and I think that's where we're going. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future Dusty Saddles starts doing some more modern westerns, and not necessarily 2023, but westerns in the mid 20th century, or even here the beginning of the 21st, because Tom Mix actually said that the West was a mood, and other than that, it was pretty much whatever you wanted it to be. And even in the 20s, Tom mixed a lot of modernity into his westerns. I mean, he had westerns with airplanes and cars, and his last great western, which was a movie serial called The Miracle Rider. He was actually against the guy who played Ming the Merciless in the Flash Gordon serials, who was scaring away the Indians with a motorized airplane because he was looking for radium deposits. But it was still a Western, because it had not only the trappings of the Western, but the feel of a Western. And I think it's more a flavor that we'll be seeing in things, and a wider and more diverse variety of things. And I also, if I'm not talking too much, I think we're tired of cowboys and Indians, whatever that means. I think we'll be seeing more stories where Native Americans are more fully developed and better fleshed out, and I think we'll probably be seeing more women as well as protagonists, which would
Absolutely.
be
Yeah, that'd be a pleasant change for things. I like it. I like strong female leads in movies and books and that type of thing. So I would welcome that. That would be great.
Yeah.
What are you currently working on? I know we have a new Tom Mix coming out real soon.
What? Oh, so real soon so I try to make all of the Tom Mix books the same but different. So one of them, Mountain Killer, for example, is a mystery, and another, Savage Mesa, is a adventure story, and one of them, Cowboy Justice, is a grim revenge tale. And my personal favorite, Hog Wild, is I hope, a very, very, very funny comedy. Right now, we have a suspense book coming out called Mountain Manhunt, where a visiting English big game hunter takes Tom to Thunder Mountain on a hunting expedition, only for Tom to find out that he is the prey, and the big game hunter is after him. He wanted somebody whose wood skills and frontier skills were equal to his, and that's I think it's pretty exciting. And the next one, the one that I'm working on now, is as yet untitled, but in it, Tom will meet the Sundance Kid. So it'll either be, it'll just be called Sundance Kid or The Return of the Sundance Kid. The amazing thing, fascinating thing about this is that in 1910, when this takes place, the Sundance Kid's only about 44 years old. So he's still relatively young, and everyone thinks he's dead in Bolivia. But actually, he is hiding out not far from Dewey, Oklahoma, and some rogue Pinkerton agents are after him and a cache of hidden gold that he had stolen from the railways. So it is Tom and the Sundance Kid against some rogue Pinkerton agents, and this one is something of a buddy story. So they're all different.
Sounds very exciting. Looking forward to seeing that coming through.
Yeah, me too.
Once you get it all down onto the paper there, yes. What advice would you have for anyone starting out in Westerns and wanting to write one, trying to figure out how to get their first book started? What would you do to encourage them?
Well, first off, you have to love them. I would hate anyone to cynically say, well, maybe Westerns are hot now and I should try a Western. No, seriously, everybody who writes westerns, or most everyone who writes westerns, does so because it comes from a place of love. I mean, they love the West, they love the myth, they love the heroes of the West, and again, it's that quality of Sir Dad. They're missing something that they didn't have, and don't underestimate how important nostalgia is for people who love westerns. And nostalgia sort of has a bad rap, in that if you like nostalgia, you're somehow retrograde or um, not reconciled with reality as it is. But nostalgia done right or thought about correctly is a great wellspring of creativity and identity. I mean, the Victorians, you could argue, based themselves on a medieval model, and their entire worldview was a nostalgic one. But to get back to your question, so I would approach the Western with the reverence that it deserves, while understanding that it's also there for you to play with, and it survived for so long because people played with it. And then the other thing is, I would say read them. If you don't want to read, then you don't have the tools or the abilities to write. So read westerns that you like, distill from them what you think works or speaks directly to you, and then somehow translate that into your own voice. And there are people out there, both publishers and readers, who are eager for westerns. And if you're ready to take this on, and you have a love of the material and the genre, then I would say read them, create your own, write them, love them, and hope for the best.
Very good advice on all of that.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty much the end of our time here today. I want to thank you again to Bob Madison, Scott McCrea, as I ought to be calling you.
In the wicked flesh.
Thank you very much. Where can people find your books?
So you could find The Tales of Tom Mix on Amazon.com. You can check my website, thetalesoftommix.com, which has links to the Amazon page. And you can also follow me on Facebook, and on Twitter. I am Scott McCrea West. So by all means, seek out and follow me, and find a Tom Mix book that tickles your fancy, and hopefully I'll get you hooked on the whole series.
Very good. Look forward to seeing all of those and the new ones coming out.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.